Nseribom, Federal Constituency of Akwa Ibom State, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to start by joining my colleagues to commend you and the entire National Assembly for the prompt passage of the 2020 appropriation, and even the action we took when it was sent back to us for amendment. And that has helped change the budget cycle of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Mr. Speaker, while studying the budget speech of Mr. President and the appropriation bill, I have a few observations which will form part of my submissions this afternoon, Mr. Speaker. I first want to commend Mr. President for timelessly bringing the budget as he promised, and it had to coincide with the exact date he brought the budget last year. And that is quite commendable, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in my place, they say, what is in a name? We found out that names can change things, names can bring good luck for people, name can bring prosperity. So it is against that background, Mr. Speaker, that I equally appreciate Mr. President for christening the 2021 budget that of economic recovery and resilience. This is apt against the fact that we are having certain forces that are militating against us as a country. We have had the pandemic, we have had the drop in oil price, so we need a serious thrust, just like a plane is taking off. And Mr. President, in his speech, has projected a recession, the country going to a second recession by this quarter, specifically by December. So in 2021, we need serious energy, serious thrust to be able to overcome the storms, to overcome the thick cloud that is provided by the 2020 fiscal year, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to commend Mr. President, too, for his commitment, which is reflected in his speech, for his commitment to executing programs aimed at lifting 100 million Nigerians out of poverty in the next 10 years. And I believe that this will not face the challenge that we have had of policy somersault when the next administration comes in. I believe that we are going to institutionalize it so that successive governments that are coming would follow along this line. This is quite commendable, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I come from the youth community. I have reason to where I am from the platform of the youth. So one very fine point in Mr. President's proposal is the creation of the National Youth Investment Fund and setting aside in a long run the sum of 75 billion, but for 2021, specifically the sum of 25 billion. Mr. Speaker, this is quite commendable against the fact that we have some young persons today who are making effort, who are quite innovative, who are quite creative. We have techies who are doing great things in this country on the platform of technology. But the great challenge they keep facing is access to finance to scale up their innovations or scale up their creativity. I believe that judicious application of the National Youth Investment Fund is going to be a buffer for our youth to access those funds and then scale up their production, and at the end of it all, stem the tide of unemployment that we have faced or we are faced with in this country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, another commendable point is from Mr. President's speech is the 50% release for capital project in the 2020 budget. This is quite commendable, and I appreciate Mr. President for that. I appreciate Mr. President for the innovative financing strategy, like the setting up of the infrastructure company, which I believe that if well funded, is going to close the infrastructure deficit or infrastructure finance gap that we have in this country, Mr. Speaker. Social investment program is quite commendable. Allocation of 420 billion to take care of like the National Youth Investment Fund and the Family Homes Fund. But our concern our concern and the concern of my people is the judicious use. We've heard about stories of funds meant for social programs during the COVID era. We've read in the pages of newspaper. As a lawyer, I would only say that from the pages of newspaper, if it is true, it is quite commendable for us to have those funds meant for social investment program ending up in private accounts. So we are calling for judicious use of these funds that are allocated for social investment program. Mr. Speaker, I commend Mr. President for the allocation to power, which was of major concern. If we need to have the economic recovery that we are proposing, then we need to fix the power sector. And the allocation to capital investment or expenditure in the power sector is quite commendable. The 150% increase in the health sector is commendable. And then the 65% of increase in the education sector is commendable, Mr. Speaker. But we have, and I would be advocating for an increase, Mr. Speaker, in the allocation for agriculture and rural development, because that is where we have the, well, I could call the basic, the wrong of Nigerians. And we are talking about diversification, and agriculture provides the basis for that diversification. So we need to increase that allocation to agriculture and rural development. Mr. Speaker, we would be advocating for an increase in the allocation to the Ministry of Works and Transportation, Mr. Speaker, with particular emphasis to railway development. Right now, before we go for alteration, constitutional alteration, where we'll be advocating for the listing of certain items like railway from the exclusive legislative list, we have to make fundings for railway development. And of particular concern to me, my state and my constituency, I mean Akwa Ibom State, and Nigeria in general, so that we can develop the Eastern Economic Corridor and even through the Northern Economic Corridor, is the Calabar, Oron, Ikorobasi, Port Harcourt, Lagos Coastal Rail. Mr. President made mention of that in his speech, but somewhere along the paragraph, when he was making mention of allocations, he made mention of allocations to only the Port Harcourt, Maiduguri rail line. So we'll be advocating for enough financing for the Calabar, Oron, Ikorobasi, Port Harcourt, Lagos coastal rail is of importance to where we come from. Mr. Speaker, we are going to be advocating too for an increase in the budgetary allocation for judiciary. Mr. Speaker, why this is so is that just some few weeks ago, Mr. President submitted the list of 8 nominees, that is justices of the Court of Appeal, to be elevated to the Supreme Court. And they are going to be provided with their accommodation, and they are going to be provided with their logistics. Mr. Speaker, we are on this floor advocated for additional provision of vehicular logistics to take care of the security of justices and judges, judicial officers, against the background of the insecurity, the kidnapping, and we had concerning a judge of the Court of Appeal and a judge of the Federal High Court. So we are going to be advocating for a little increase in the allocation to the judiciary to accommodate that. And in this form, Mr. Speaker, we have had a bill seeking to amend the Constitution, extending and enlarging the composition of the Court of Appeal. And if that sees the light of the day in the National Assembly, that means that we are going to be asking for the logistics to take care of those justices, additional justices that are going to be appointed into the Court of Appeal, Mr. Speaker. However, Mr. Speaker, there are some areas of concerns which I would want to share in this House. Mr. Speaker, one great area of concern is the rising public debt profile of our country and the burden and the obligation that we are putting not only on our children's generation, but even on our great-grandchildren's generation. Mr. Speaker, I want to be heard clearly. There is no problem in borrowing, provided we are not borrowing to consume. There is no problem in borrowing, provided we apply the proceeds of borrowing to judiciously, sincerely, and transparently to the building and development of infrastructure. But Mr. Speaker, we can reduce the borrowing of government if we check and plug the leakages in ministries, departments, and agencies. So I want to lend my voice with that of my colleagues, asking for and with that of Mr. President, who has advocated for us to look at the revenue side of all ministries, department, and agency. And we make sure that they comply with the TSA so that we can reduce the debt profile of our country. It's of major concern to my people, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, another concern in the budget, sir, the Fiscal Responsibility Bill makes it clear that the deficit, thank you, sir, that whatever is going to be in the finance bill is not to occasion additional hardship to Nigerians. So we should look at the content and then the provisions on the clauses of the bill that is going to come. Mr. Speaker, so that I round up, sir, part of funding of the budget is going to come from proceeds of privatization. That is of concern to us, Mr. Speaker, against the background of what we have witnessed. Mr. Speaker, we have done privatization in the power sector. Part of what we are having in the budget today is 16 billion to be refunded for those who invested in the Yola electricity distribution company, Mr. Speaker. That means that, Mr. Speaker, we are calling for transparent process in the privatization so that we can engender investor confidence who would come in. Mr. Speaker, I would use this point to advocate for us to look at the issue around the privatization of aluminum smelter company in Ikorobas in Akwa Ibom State. If we resolve those issues and get that company working, Mr. Speaker, would have reduced the challenges we are facing today. So I'm saying all this to underscore the fact that whatsoever we are going to do under privatization, it should be as transparent as possible. So, Mr. Speaker, more funding should be given for roads, Mr. Speaker.
Another minute, please, so
1
we
minute,
can round
sir.
up. Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, roads leading to and out of Akwa Ibom is dilapidated. Of concern is the Calabar-Itu Highway, Ikorekpene Umuohia Road, Ikorekpene Aba Road, Mr. Speaker. Funding given to Ministry of Works, additional funding would cater for this, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker,
Contribution. Thank you, Honorable Luke.